Monday. It is August 22nd. We are now in the final stretches towards the midterm elections. This is when it gets really good. I think September 1st is when most people, but I mean, I'm excited. This is like preseason a little still, but if you're a political junkie, this is, we're entering the final stretches. When I was at the RNC and even the NRCC, the Congressional Committee, like this was it. You were out there knocking on doors and making sure things were all ready to go. Kids are going ready back to school. Anyway, I hope you had a good weekend. For most Americans, they get 2 days off and every week, and you relax, maybe catch up on some chores, do some yard work, whatever. It's interesting, though. It's been since August 9th since we've had a White House briefing. August 9th. What's the new press secretary doing? Now, I've been very vocal before, talking about how the briefing is not the be-all and end-all of what the White House press secretary does. But when this White House came into power, they were so adamant that they were going to make sure that there was a briefing every day. That was Jen Psaki's promise. That was Joe Biden's promise. Because remember, the end of the Trump administration, they hadn't done any briefings, and it was an outrage. And all the Democrats were so adamant that there had to be a briefing. And the White House press corps, man, they were hardcore too. We have to have a briefing. It has to happen. And yet here we are now, since August 9th, nothing from the White House press secretary. And nobody seems to think this is a problem. It's just amazing. I mean, we talk about hypocrisy and double standards. It's just not a peep from any of these folks about the fact that they're not getting updates. And no one seems to complain. I guess it's August, so it's like, hey, it's okay that she's not working. So that's interesting. But it's also not just her. Vice President Kamala Harris, she's on vacation. Joe Biden spent 16 days holed up in the White House because of COVID, which, frankly, for a White House that talks about following the science, didn't follow the science because it's supposed to be 5 days. And then he got a reoccurrence of it because he took that Paxlovid, which we all know, or we were told at the time, could have this sort of rebound effect. And so he holed up again and then took off. And it was funny, by the way, they timed it perfectly. It was always interesting. Something that I thought was fascinating, and it got no media attention, is they announced his travel schedule before he had tested twice negative. Don't you think that it was interesting? No one picked up on that. And then they changed the kind of test that he did. They noted that in the thing, and no one picked up on it. They said he's now tested twice on an antigen test. They slyly slid that in. It wasn't a PCR test. I'm not a doctor. I don't get it. But why did they change the type of test? I think it has to do with the fact that they knew they had announced a travel schedule before he had tested twice negative. I don't know. There was just something there that was weird. But anyway, he goes from there to South Carolina to go on vacation. So he goes from hanging out in Rehoboth at his beach house to coming back to the White House to spend 16 days holed up there, to then going on vacation in South Carolina. Now, the kicker is he flies back to sign a bill to then go to Rehoboth on vacation. I mean, it's amazing. Who's working? For all this stuff about Trump, going to Trump properties and doing all this, it wasn't that he wasn't working. They were always worried about where he was going. He was going to a Trump property. He was doing this and that. These guys are literally unheard of, and no one thinks that's a problem. I know the left calls it whataboutism. I just call it like amazing, because it's not a peep from any of these guys. And I think the thing is that they were so tired during the Trump administration of having to work that now they're kind of like, oh, it's kind of cool that we don't have to do anything. I don't know. But the one thing he did come back on, this brings me to the second thing, is this: he did fly back to sign this. They called it the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, let's just stop for a second, because the second the bill's signed, every media outlet says Biden signs bill to deal with climate change and environment and all this. They didn't even, once it was signed, they stopped even using the name because they couldn't lie about it anymore. There's nothing to do with inflation. The Congressional Budget Office and the Joint Committee on Taxation, which are the nonpartisan scorekeepers up on Capitol Hill, both admit that it has nothing to do with inflation. It doesn't affect it at all. It literally spends the most amount of money on climate which is just going to get thrown out the window. I mean, that's unbelievable how much money we're going to spend that we don't have, that you are then going to pay in higher taxes. That didn't also get covered. Remember, Biden said he wasn't going to raise taxes from the rostrum of the House of Representatives during his first address to Congress on anyone making less than $400,000. Not true. You are going to pay for this. Your taxes are going up. So beyond climate, what are you paying for? You're paying for upwards of 87,000 new employees at the IRS. Now, here's the thing that's a kicker to me. They're not going anywhere. It's done. It's signed. The IRS has that money. They're going to hire these people. They will be around for what? A generation, I guess, because they hire people who are 20, 30, 40 years old. Like they'll be there for 10, 15, 20 years. They have nothing to do but to go after you, to audit you, to follow up on your taxes. And even if you've done nothing wrong, and this is what the thing that's always funny about when people say, like, oh, if you've done nothing wrong, do you realize, like, having someone show up from the IRS and go through everything and be like, what's this receipt? I mean, first of all, unbelievably time consuming. I mean, can you imagine me like, 6 years ago, there's a receipt here that says, I mean, it is an unbelievable nuance. And it is unbelievable, what we have just done in terms of how much money that we have spent. And they're calling this a win. We talked about this before. A win? How is it a win? You lied to you about what it was about. It's more money that's getting thrown out the window. It's going to result in higher taxes and more IRS agents. In what world is that a win? I don't know what party you belong to if you think that's a win. What country you live in or what school you went to that makes you think that that's a win. But I don't think that that's possibly, in any world, a win. Obviously, the big story last week, and I think it's going to continue to be a story this week, is that raid of the president's home in Mar-a-Lago. I've talked about this before. We've talked about it literally every night on Spice Run Company because there's a twist and turn almost every day in this. And I think, obviously, the big news that's coming into this week is what's going to happen on Thursday. So last week, Judge Reinhardt, this magistrate judge in Florida. Now, the thing that's interesting is I'm constantly learning as we get ready for the show, depending on what guest we have, something new about this case. The thing that's fascinating to me is these magistrate judges are not what they call Article III judges. Those are not the permanent lifetime federal judges. These magistrate judges are chosen by other judges. They serve 8-year terms. So it's almost like you're auditioning to be a federal judge. And it was fascinating what Judge Reinhardt did. So they come in and they say, okay, the media, that's who largely did this, and the Trump team, want to see what's in this affidavit. Why did you grant the warrant? What did you have? What witnesses, what evidence, etc.? That's what the affidavit would show. The Department of Justice says, we don't want to show you that because, it's going to give up who the witnesses were. It's going to say that, little Timmy told us that, in this room there was X, Y, and Z, right? And so we don't want everyone to know that that was our witness and that he told us this because that's going to undermine our investigation and it's going to give away what we know and how we knew it, etc. So that was their rationale. But the judge, interestingly, there's two things that I think were fascinating about this. One is the judge says, no, you don't get to just do that. You don't get to just decide that, in the interest of transparency, we do get to see what's in this. But why don't you come back and this Thursday, show me what your proposed redactions are, or I'll make them for you. Okay. So I was a little shocked on that because I kind of thought that he might side with the government. But the second part is, and this is something that one of my colleagues was saying, is that if you're a lawyer for the government, for the DOJ, you went into that thinking that there's two things. One, he was going to side with you. Okay, there's your grade. Or B, he was going to say, show me your redactions. I want to see. He could have right there and then. Why did he wait a week? They knew this. They knew there was a hearing, the DOJ. They knew that that was the most likely outcome that wouldn't favor them. And so they should have been ready to say, okay, here are our proposed redactions. Here's why we think this and blah, 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 make a ruling. Instead, Reinhardt says, give me your redactions in a week. He's dragging this out for no reason. He knew the lawyers would have come prepared. They must have come prepared. That's their job. So it was fascinating from the standpoint that he dragged it out for an entire week. But obviously on Thursday, we're going to see what it is. And it's going to be the DOJ versus him. I'm of the mindset that I think we're going to see something because Reinhart wants to pretend that he did his job by saying, well, here I am. I released this affidavit. But it's going to be like like they're going to cross out every word that's not a participle. So mark my word, maybe a little bit more than that, but not much more. You're not going to see a name. You're not going to see any complete sentences. But they're going to want to be able to say, we released the affidavit. So I think Thursday is going to be a big day because they're going to spin it that they released something, but it's not going to be anything significant. And it's interesting. Obviously, there's so much to break down in this thing in terms of the passports and everything else. The reason I think the passports are big is because you have a warrant to go in and search all the stuff. The passports weren't on it. Just weren't. Everybody knows what a passport looks like. Most of the time, people guard their passport. It's in a drawer, a safe, whatever. So if you're an agent and you're pulling all the stuff that's in the warrant, you're looking around, and you see someone's passports, how do you mistake those for something else? You're an FBI agent, right? I mean, this is not a rent-a-cop. I don't understand that. They gave them back, and I get that. And everyone kind of goes, oh, they gave them back, no big deal. It is a big deal. You're a trained federal agent. How did you screw that up? I mean, this thing just really looks and reeks of Keystone Cops. And frankly, it looks like it's politically motivated. And that's just not a good look for the Department of Justice and the FBI. They need more transparency. If you're going to go after a former president of the United States, you better not look like it's politically motivated. And especially in an environment like this. And it does. All right. I want to move on to politics, to primaries and politics. It's kind of the fourth thing on the list. There are 4 big Senate races that I see right now that are important. If the Republicans want to take back the Senate, it's right now, it is a dead even Senate, 50-50. You've got Kamala Harris breaking the tie, so that's who puts the Democrats in charge. So the Republicans have a few seats, key seats that they need to defend, and then obviously they need to make up some ground. So the big defend seats right now are Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, I'd say. In Wisconsin, Ron Johnson announced he was running for re-election, which is awesome. His latest poll comes out, shows him down 7. That's surprising. I thought he would be up, and he's in this environment he should be up, and I think that caught a lot of people off guard because he's the only one that can pretty much probably hold that seat right now, and I think that caught a lot of the Washington establishment and the Republican Party off guard. In Ohio, J.D. Vance is, I think, keeping this race tight, but Tim Ryan, the Democrat congressman that's the Democratic nominee, is running this sort of blue-collar, populist-type campaign. He's running against the grain of what most Democrats are running like right now, and being the guy who is sort of the old-school, moderate, blue dog Democrat. And this is worrying. This is the seat that Rob Portman is vacating. And so Republicans, they have to hold this. And Ohio is becoming fairly red. I mean, you got a Republican governor. You got 2 Republican senators. Trump carried it both times. I mean, there's no excuse here. And I think that Peter Thiel, the financier, backed Vance, and people need to step in and get this thing moving again. In Pennsylvania, man, holy smokes. Dr. Oz could not have a better landscape in Pennsylvania. Everything that's hidden there in terms of the Biden administration's policies of being anti-coal, anti-fracking, inflation, all of those things favor the Republican candidate, right? And then you got this guy, John Fetterman, who is to the left of Bernie Sanders. He's a trust fund kid that hasn't held a job, and he walks around in like a Carhartt sweatshirt and tries to pretend that he's like a man of the people. What a joke. But he's been off the trail for 3 months because he had a stroke, and I'm glad he's getting better, and I'm glad he's back on the campaign trail. But you could not have been handed a better political gift than having a guy that's that left-wing that was off the campaign trail, and yet Oz is down 10 points. It's just, he has got the best political environment, the worst candidate to run against, and he's down 10 points. There's a lot of folks that are saying he's not running running the race that he needs to race. He's not raising the money he needs to do, and that's a hold, right? So Senator Pat Toomey is a Republican retiring. Those 3 states that I mentioned, those are hold. Those are like if you're gonna try to take the majority, you got to hold those states. And then you start looking around, and there's states that Republicans are reaching for. They want to win in New Hampshire. They want to win in Colorado. But Georgia, where Herschel Walker is the Republican nominee running against Senator Raphael Warnock, that's a seat that Republicans think they can pick off, that they need to pick off. Now, I would say this. Walker is doing a lot better. He's hitting Warnock. He's keeping this race between 3 and 4, which is about the margin of error. And I think you're going to see a lot of outside money flood into there in these final days. A lot of the Washington team come in, and that's good because I think that's a must win. We can't win Georgia. We're in big trouble. Arizona is another one that is just worrying me, and Blake Masters is the nominee out there, another candidate backed by Peter Thiel. But this is a pickup. If Republicans want the majority, you got to get at least one of those 2, Arizona or Georgia, right? And Blake Masters got the Trump endorsement, won the primary. He's facing Senator Mark Kelly. Remember, Mark Kelly's the astronaut who is the husband of Gabby Giffords, won that special election. Now he's running for the full term there. But again, it's Arizona. You got massive problems with the border. You got economic problems. Like, you should be painting this guy. This is not a tough race to run. And they need to get in there and start spending some serious money. And it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out. But you've got a lot of people in Washington that are really getting worried about what's going on. And I don't mean to make this like the Washington people, but like at the end of the day, if they end up, like if you want to stop the Biden agenda, 50 doesn't do it. Kamala Harris keeps breaking the ties and the Senate organizes and Chuck Schumer stays as majority leader. You want to stop these confirmations, these nominations, and you actually want to control the agenda, you need 51. So these guys got to get their act together in these final 80 days. And it's getting harder and harder. The abortion vote definitely energized folks. I think that the Mar-a-Lago raid got the MAGA team fired up a little. That's good. But mechanics have always mattered in politics. This is something I've said for a long time. You cannot just sort of hope that your opponent sucks. You have to run a good campaign. You have to raise money. You got to get people out there. You got to knock on doors, put up signs, make the phone calls, get on the air. And in a lot of these campaigns, they're just not doing it. And unfortunately, you can't do that. It's like sort of training for a marathon. You can't wake up one day and say, I'm going to run a marathon next Saturday. There's a reason that people do it over the course of months. And so there's still time. Don't get me wrong. We're 80 days out. This is the wake-up call. This is like when you go to the doctor and he says, hey, we're seeing some things that we don't like. Here's what I need you to change and correct. Well, we're at the correct phase. All of those races are winnable. Every single one of them. So I'm hoping that what we see is a shift in that. But you're seeing the money in the shift and the TV time. That's what you should keep an eye on. Who's putting money where and reserving what television time, and from the outside groups and from the Washington party organizations, because that's the ultimate test. Who's buying the big chunks of airtime? That is still the gold standard of understanding what's happening. By the way, tomorrow night, Tuesday, we're going to have primaries in New York and Florida. Florida, a lot of interesting Republican primaries. You've got a race in a lot of these new districts to finally determine who the Republican nominees are going to be. It's interesting. No one that you've got the Anna Paulina race in one. I think she'll be fine. There's another race with Corey Mills running against another guy he's a Navy veteran. And so there's a bunch of these primaries where I think, again, ultimately they all end up being Republican wins. It'll just be interesting to see who the Republican standard bearer is. There is a Dem primary. Shouldn't be any too big shockwaves out of there. It'll be interesting to see Charlie Crist seeking to take on run for governor, take back his old governor seat. But he's got a primary there, and then Val Demings is running to try to take on Marco Rubio. She should be fine in that primary as well. I don't think we should see any big shocks out of Florida. And then New York is interesting. There's more action on the Dem side than there is on the Republican side. There's one special election. Carl Palladino is running in a special election against the New York State chairman for the retiring seat of Tom Reed, who had stepped down. Sort of an interesting dynamic there. I'll be interested to see who comes out of that primary. Again, a little bit more of the establishment versus sort of a Tea Party thing. But Elise Stefanik has backed Carl Palladino in that race. And again, like I said, it pits her against the current state party chairman who's running in that primary. Fascinating dynamic there. Interesting, like, total side note, Trump endorsed and intervened in two of the Democratic primaries, which we all get the joke, right? I think it was just trying to screw with them. He gave a backhanded endorsement to Democratic Dan Goldman, who's running in one of the races there. And then Carolyn Maloney, who was elected in the 90s, is running against Jerry Nadler, current chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And he endorsed her. And I think she's trailing Nadler massively. And by the way, total side note, Nadler got endorsed by Schumer and a bunch of the other guys. I think it's funny when Democrats who talk all about how empowering women and more women and blah, 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 all endorse the white dude. And they've all pretty much come down on the side of Nadler, which is fascinating because they're really good at lecturing everybody and then doing the exact opposite. So it'll be, again, I think it's if you're a junkie watching some of these Florida and New York primaries, it could be fun. But Nadler is supposed to win this. The latest poll has him up 20 points, so don't expect too much out of that. And then some quick media notes. Yesterday was the last episode of Reliable Sources on CNN. Brian Stelter was the first. We talked about this in Spicer and Company. Brian Stelter was ceremoniously fired. Apparently, there's a big Zoom farewell party for him and Jeffrey Toobin. If you don't get that joke, Google it. So they fire Stetler, and the word is that that the new head of CNN, Chris Litt, wanted to sort of make CNN less, political and less anti-Republican. Here's the thing. Brian's show was once a week on Sundays. You got guys like, Don Lemon. They're on every night. There are much more. And then you got a bunch of the other folks on every day. I think that Brian Stelter was a scalp. He was, Chris Litt had to come in and kind of kill a hostage and show that he was serious about this and whatever. I'm not sure that was the guy. I mean, I got a bunch more people. You want to fire people? Go fire Don Lemon. Go fire Jim Acosta. I mean, the list is long of people that are anti-Republican, that are very one-sided in their coverage of politics at CNN. I'm not sure that was the guy. I'm not saying I'm upset that he's going. But the other thing that I thought was fascinating, by the way, is they're getting rid of the entire show. Yesterday was the last episode of Reliable Sources. Now, again, I love media and I love politics, and when you put them together, it's great. So Reliable Sources, if you don't know the show, was previously hosted by Howard Kurtz, who's now on Fox. He hosts a show called Media Buzz there now. He had been there before. He'd been a Washington Post columnist as well, wrote a column there called Reliable Sources. But before that, it was a guy named Bernard Kalb, long-time guy, and I actually had known his daughter. I think it was Debbie Kalb. Was that her name? She was a New Jersey reporter when I was doing a couple races in New Jersey. But anyway, I mean, this is a long-time show. It's their longest show ever. And the ratings were pretty good on a Sunday. I think they actually would beat a lot of their weekday shows. So when he nicked the entire show, it's not that they just fired Brian. They fired everybody, which I was like, I kind of thought that was fascinating. Anyway, it's tough because it was a lot of great content for Spicer and Company. Every Monday, we always talk about the Sunday shows, and so I'm a little sad. Yeah, a little sad because we always had something to make fun of Brian Stelter on Mondays, and now I'm going to have to look elsewhere. So, this was the last one, and sorry about that. So good luck, Brian. One other quick point. I touched on this on Friday's episode of Spicer and Company in case you missed it. When I started with Dancing in the Stars, when it was announced, you probably remember, like, Tom Bergeron put out the statement. A lot of the people at ABC, some of the shows that were on, and a bunch of reporters all melted down that this was a disgrace and I had to be canceled, and they were protesting and all that. Because I was on a reality television show about dancing. That was horrible, horrendous, an attack on democracy, unpatriotic, all of those horrible things. Okay, so start with that as your model. Last week, all week, Al Franken, the disgraced Me Too former senator who resigned in disgrace, I use that word twice, hosted their flagship late-night show, Jimmy Kimmel Live. And not a peep out of a single person at ABC. Not one. I'm sorry. He groped women. he demeaned women. He had a ton of accusations against him. And he co-hosted their flagship, and not one person, not one female person there, or male, objected to it publicly. Why? What is he, suddenly, like, he's cool now? It's cool to be funny and to host. And again, I'm not saying that, like, I'm just saying, I was Donald Trump's spokesman, and therefore I couldn't go on a dancing reality show, but Jimmy Kimmel's show can be hosted by a guy who had to resign in disgrace because there's photographic evidence of him demeaning women? I mean, these same people who are so outraged by everything on the right are literally like, oh, okay, no problem. It is unbelievable. So, anyway, until Thursday, that's it from me. I appreciate you subscribing, reviewing, sharing, and I hope you've enjoyed the last several episodes. I have. I really enjoyed doing this, and I appreciate your support for this. So look forward to seeing you on Thursday for another great conversation. I am excited for the guest. It's someone you'll definitely recognize. So anyway, I'm excited. I'll see you on Thursday. Have a great rest of the week.